there. Fuck. How typical of me to join a conversation after everybody's already saturated with the subject and they moved on, but last week I've watched JaclynGlenn's second video about ELLIOT RODGER, and I've been reading his manifesto for the past few days, which made me wanna take a bath, and it's just been nagging at me, so I guess I gotta make a video about ELLIOT RODGER. Fuck! But let me just say that there is no beef between me and Jaclyn. I've met the girl, we hung out together, we went drinking together, or should I say drunking? This is just an amiable disagreement. We are both vloggers, we talk about controversial issues on a public forum, so occasionally we can make responses and disagree with each other. So Jaclyn, you made 2 videos about ELLIOT RODGER. I found a lot of problems with your first video. I don't feel like you addressed them well enough in your second one, where you start off by making a sarcastic faux apology in response to the criticism you received on your initial video.
In the last video I said that ELLIOT RODGER had mental issues and that those were solely to blame for what he did, that nothing else had any impact at all on his actions, and that it was only because he had this mental condition that he did what he did.
And then you respond in a more serious matter later on.
I never said that mental illness was solely to blame. I said several times there were other things that played a role.
So here's my issue with this. While you may have not claimed that ELLIOT RODGER's mental illness was solely to blame for what happened, you did imply several times throughout your video that it was the primary cause behind his actions, as opposed to misogyny being the primary cause. I mean, this is what your video is about. You say this in plain English after reading a page from his manifesto.
How can anybody look at something like this and say, I think it's because he was misogynistic, or I think it was because of something else. I don't think it was so much of a mental illness.
In fact, you even titled your video ELLIOT RODGER Madman versus Misogynist. You use the word versus when you put 2 ideas in opposition with each other so you can declare one of them correct. And I will talk about Elliot's misogyny in a minute, but my first issue with your initial video is that you start right off the bat by making it sound like mental illness, mental instability, whatever that is, and insanity are like one and the same thing or in the same category. I mean, you use all 3 terms in the same sentence as if they are interchangeable.
And they like to downplay, in this case, mental illness. This guy was clearly mentally insane. Now, I'm looking at the video that he made and other things that he said, it's clear that he is not mentally stable.
So it's pretty obvious that according to what you say in this video, even if there are other things that come into play, the main reason behind ELLIOT RODGER killing people is because he was mentally ill, mentally unstable, mentally insane. I mean, this is important. When there's already so much misinformation and prejudice and stigma around mental illness, it's important that when we talk about it, we don't spread any more of that and confuse things even more. Like by piling together mental illness with insanity. That's just no bueno. As for mental instability, which you later on point at again as being the problem for what happened.
Guns are not the problem. This kid's mental instability is the problem.
I guess mental instability is a colloquialism. I've personally never heard it before. I'm not sure what you mean by it. There's such a thing as emotional instability, which is the diagnosis borderline personality disorder, but I don't think that's what you meant. As for mental illness, this is such an annoyingly broad and general term. It encompasses so many specific disorders, anything from depression to schizophrenia. And I know you're not a specialist and neither am I, so I'm not gonna ask you to give your opinion on what mental illness do you think he had. But if you're going to imply, and you did many times in this video, that ELLIOT RODGER killed those people because he was mentally ill, then you are making a correlation between mental illness and violence.
If I sat here and said, people with mental illnesses are dangerous, I hear ya, I would understand, that's generalizing. But if I say ELLIOT RODGER had a mental illness, that's just me not being specific.
But you see, you're not just saying that ELLIOT RODGER had a mental illness. Your video is arguing that ELLIOT RODGER had a mental illness and that's why he killed people. I mean, your video, your first video, is based around these premises. So I think it is important, it is necessary to mention that statistically speaking, mentally ill people are not more prone to violence than anybody else. And in fact, somebody who's mentally ill is more likely to become the victim of a violent crime than to commit one. Now back to the term insanity. While this term is not medically relevant anymore, it is legally relevant. And in your video, Jaclyn, in your second video, you mentioned this as well.
And in this video, I'm clearly talking about how he was insane, which by the way is a legal term.
I probably have too many lawyers in my family. I'm gonna get into this, I can't let it go. Basically, legally, an insane person is somebody who's not mentally competent to distinguish right from wrong. More precisely, somebody who is incapable of understanding that what they're doing is against the law, and therefore they're not considered legally responsible for their actions. ELLIOT RODGER was not insane. How can we tell? From his blog posts, from his videos, from his interactions with other people on different websites, from his bloody manifesto, from his retribution video which he posted like right before going on his rampage, where he says what he's gonna do and he explains his reasons for doing it. It is clear that ELLIOT RODGER understood the law and he knew that he was going to commit a crime. He planned this for a long time. This is not a person who's driven by insanity and doesn't understand right from wrong. Yes, his manifesto is chilling, but so are the interviews with Ted Bundy. And Jaclyn, you read a paragraph from ELLIOT's manifesto where he claims that he's not part of the human species because women never wanted to mate with him, so that humanity rejected him, and then he goes on this over-the-top dramatic act about how he's more than human, he's superior and magnificent and the closest thing there is to a human god, and he's gonna purify the world. So to this you say,
how can anybody look at something like this and say, I think it's because he was misogynistic, or I think it was because of something else. I don't think it was so much of a mental illness.
Even if you take that paragraph and isolate it from the rest of the manifesto and just leave it on its own, I don't know how anybody, not even a specialist, can read that and conclude that ELLIOT RODGER was mentally ill. That's mental illness talking, just based off that. As for insanity, yes, that paragraph is over the top and obviously filled with narcissism. However, if you read his entire manifesto, you can see that this is a person who's perfectly coherent, he's perfectly consistent, he can clearly distinguish fantasy from reality. For instance, he's talking about creating this perfect world where, among other things, women would be starved to death in concentration camps. It's a very lovely read. However, he later writes, "It is such a shameful pity that my ideal world cannot be created. I realized long ago that there is no way I could possibly rise to such level of power in my lifetime with the way the world is now. Such a thing will never become a reality for me, but it did give me something to fantasize about, as I burned with hatred towards all women for rejecting me throughout the years." So clearly this is a person who understands what's reality and what's fantasy, but even more so, he understands that his fantasies, his ideal world, can never be achieved. So instead he just went for the next best thing. He did the most damage he could with the amount of power he had. And actually he first planned his killing spree to take place on Halloween, but then changed his plans because there would be too many cops walking around during an event like Halloween, and cops are the only ones who could hinder my plans. This is not an insane person incapable of understanding that what they're planning is against the law. For fuck's sake, he even rescheduled his killing spree in order to avoid getting caught by the cops too fast. The first time he mentions his retribution day is back in 2012, which is when he bought his first gun. He didn't just up and kill people because he didn't know right from wrong. He was ideologically motivated.
How can anybody look at something like this and say, I think it's because he was misogynistic?
And maybe the paragraph you chose to read doesn't reflect his misogynism that well, but this does. I concluded that all women are flawed. There is something mentally wrong with the way their brains are wired, as if they haven't evolved from animal-like thinking. They are incapable of reason or thinking rationally. They are like animals, completely controlled by their primal, depraved emotions and impulses. That is why they are attracted to barbaric, wild, beast-like men. They are beasts themselves. Beasts should not be able to have any rights in a civilized society. Women are like a plague. They don't deserve any rights. Their wickedness must be contained in order to prevent future generations from falling to degeneracy. Women are vicious, evil, barbaric animals, and they need to be treated as such. Women's rejection of me is a declaration of war. And if it's war they want, then war they shall have. It will be a war that will result in their complete and utter annihilation. And I mentioned before this fantasy, this ideal world of his, which he understood is not reality and understood it cannot become reality, which is really important. However, what did he fantasize about? The first strike against women will be to quarantine all of them in concentration camps. At these camps, the vast majority of the female population will be deliberately starved to death. That would be an efficient and fitting way to kill them all off. I would take great pleasure and satisfaction in condemning every single woman on earth to starve to death. A few women would be spared, however, for the sake of reproduction. These women would be kept and bred in secret labs. There they will be artificially inseminated with sperm samples in order to produce offspring. Their depraved nature will slowly be bred out of them in time. Future generations of men would be oblivious to these remaining women's existence, and that is for the best. I mean, you can't attribute the crap that he wrote in his manifesto to mental illness. Just like that. I mean, not unless anybody can name one mental illness known to men that has extreme misogyny as one of its symptoms.
And a lot of times there are some men out there who do get violent whenever they don't get what they want, when they don't get the girl that they want, when they get rejected, when they don't get sex. I understand. But this kid is not a good example of that because he was mentally insane.
No, he was not insane. Mentally insane. Physically insane. I mean, if you take ELLIOT RODGER's manifesto and you put it side by side with Mein Kampf, he kinda sounds like he's Hitler's estranged little cousin or something, only with a hatred redirected on women. And yes, it is an officially established rule that in any discussion about murder or killings of any kind, someone at some point has to bring up Hitler. You're welcome. ELLIOT RODGER was obviously racist as well, and he considered himself more worthy of female attention than those men he perceived to be less white than him, like the full-blooded Asians, the filthy blacks, low-class Latinos. Gotta love this guy, right? Obviously, the kid had a lot of hatred for a lot of people. However, throughout his manifesto and his videos and all this garbage that he posted online, it is so undeniably evident that the focus of his hatred is on women. Consistently.
Not to mention he killed more men than women.
This is such a mind-blowing, silly argument, Jaclyn, and I keep on seeing this popping up all over the place. I can't believe how many people take this as a good enough argument that this crime was motivated by misogyny because he killed more men than women. Bam! Dear Internet, ELLIOT RODGER killed more men than women because he couldn't get his way. He couldn't manage to get inside that sorority house, which we know he tried to do. Had he been successful, we'd probably be looking at a different pile of victims right now. How do we know this? Because he says so. I mean, do we suddenly just forget about intent? Does that matter for anything anymore? Let's do some basic criminal law. Motive. The cause that moves people to induce a certain action. What did ELLIOT RODGER say his motive was?
You girls have never been attracted to me. I don't know why you girls aren't attracted to me, but I will punish you all for it.
His repeatedly declared motive was that women were never attracted to him, so he wants to punish them. Intention. The decision to bring about a prohibited consequence. What were ELLIOT RODGER's intentions?
On the day of retribution, I am going to enter the hottest sorority house of UCSB. And I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut I see inside there.
His declared intention was to enter that sorority house and start killing women inside there. He failed to do that, so instead he went on a spree.
Don't take an issue like this and try to twist it around and downplay his mental instability to give more credit to misogyny.
Now, I am well aware that in this dysfunctional, atheist, non-religious people online community of ours, there's a backlash against feminism right now, and some people can get reactionary just when they hear the word misogyny. But here you have a kid who over and over again, in writing and video format, talks about how much he hates women because they're not attracted to him like they're supposed to, because he is the perfect gentleman, remember? So he would like to put women in concentration camps and starve them to death as punishment. That would be lovely, but too bad he cannot do that. He doesn't have enough power. So instead he's just gonna go ahead and kill a bunch of them. Nothing to see here, folks, just mental illness, move it along. And Jaclyn, in your video you admit that ELLIOT RODGER was a misogynist. However, you don't seem to think that his hatred of women was his motive to kill. You think misogyny only played a role. and that he ultimately killed because he was a madman. I could see you making that point if ELLIOT RODGER said that he hates women and wants to kill them because women are actually demons from hell and he's like a fucking demon slayer. However, what he said was that he hates women and wants to kill them because women didn't wanna mate with him. His motive was inherently misogynistic. He hated some other men too, but his reasons for that are tightly connected to his misogyny. He hated other men because they had the women that he felt he deserved. And let's not forget about his ideal world, because this is really important. Remember how he described his ideal world to be? That's a world with no women in it. Yeah, a few women would be kept just to be artificially inseminated, but no one would even think about them. Their depraved nature will slowly be bred out of them in time. Future generations of men would be oblivious to these remaining women's existence, and that is for the best. He doesn't fantasize about eradicating the whole of humanity, but just women. Please, people, just read his damn manifesto. I know it's not a short read, and it's definitely not a pleasant one, but don't just take in what other people are saying about ELLIOT RODGER and his reasons. Read what ELLIOT RODGER says about ELLIOT RODGER and his reasons. ELLIOT RODGER is an example of a misogynistic man who felt entitled to sex and then turned violent when he didn't get it. That doesn't mean that all men should be feared as potential mass murderers, but there is relevance in a discussion about misogyny in our society and how can that lead to violence. And let's not forget that sexism is usually a two-way street, because ELLIOT RODGER was obviously a guy who felt the pressure that our culture puts on boys to lose their virginity fast. You ain't no real man until you get some, and if you're still a virgin at 22, then you're clearly pathetic. What a loser. And don't get me wrong, I'm not making any excuses for ELLIOT RODGER whatsoever, but what I'm saying is that his actions did not take place just like randomly in the void. They took place in a social context. And maybe ELLIOT RODGER did have a mental illness that made him more susceptible to like social influences and pressures and made him take ideas to extremes. However, this social context is still absolutely relevant. And there is one more thing in Jaclyn's video that I just have to respond to. This is gonna be such a long video.
It reminds me a lot of all the anti-bullying campaigns that go on, and that's great because bullying is a problem just like misogyny is a problem. But the problem that people have with this is they try to fix the bullies. And as much as you try, it's not ever going to work completely. What you have to do is you have to target the kids who are being bullied and teach them to stand up for themselves. Don't teach them to be afraid, teach them to fight against it.
This was what you said in your first video, and in your second video you're responding to MrRepzion about it, and I'm gonna play a bit of that too.
What you have to do is you have to target the kids who are being bullied and teach them to stand up for themselves.
Just stand up for yourself. Grow some balls. No, that mentality, Jaclyn, is not a solution. Telling someone just to stand up for yourself for being bullied is not a solution to the issue of bullying.
Oh, so I said bullying was a problem, and that these campaigns are great. I'm sorry, I thought I heard differently.
Now, while you do admit that bullying is a problem, can anyone deny that really? You said that a solution to the problem would be to target the victims and teach them to fight against it and stand up for themselves. You explained your reasons for saying that, however, you're not really giving any suggestions as to how do we do that.
And there are other ways to fight against bullying, and one of those is empowering the victims, and that is in no way belittling them.
I'm sorry, but how exactly do you empower a kid and teach him to stand up for himself while he's having his head shoved down the toilet by like 3 other kids twice as big as he is? I mean, we are talking reality here and not Karate Kid. Now, what I think should happen, I think everybody should target the parents, to target the schools, to target the bullies. What? First of all, I think schools should have regulations that prepare kids for the real world. The real world, stealing from people is punishable by law, so if you steal another kid's lunch money, there should be a punishment for that. In the real world, throwing a rock at somebody, that can get you charged with assault. Beating somebody up, that's battery. One way to fix the bully is by implementing and enforcing rules that make it hard for the bully to victimize somebody and get away with it. Schools shouldn't turn a blind eye to bullying just because the bully happens to be a good athlete, or in other ways improves the school image. Or maybe because a bullying track record would look bad for the school. Or maybe the parents are big donors. And parents should put pressure on the schools to admit when there is a bully bullying problem and try to rectify it, even if it's not your kid who's the victim. On this note, I think we should teach kids to stand up for others and not just themselves. Bullying often happens while a crowd is watching and nobody does anything to help the victim. It's the bystander effect, which sometimes is encouraged by the parents. Don't get involved or you might get hurt too. And on top of that, there's also this spirit of camaraderie between school peers because the teachers are the authority, they're basically the enemy. If you say anything to the teachers, then you're a snitch, and that's bad. So I think it's really important we teach these kids that yes, camaraderie is a nice thing to be part of, but not when abuse is involved. And by the way, I'm not saying tell them to intervene every single time they see bullying occur, no matter what. If there is a situation when they see somebody being bullied and they cannot intervene neither physically nor even verbally without fear of becoming like targets themselves, then they should at least report it. They should report an injustice when they see it, even if another kid is the victim. Saying we need to target the victims of bullying and teach them to stand up for themselves may sound nice, I guess, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't even sound that nice to me, but it may sound nice to you. However, unless that's your child, what control do you even have? Maybe this is a kid whose parents are junkies and they're never around to teach him anything. Or maybe this is a kid who's already abused at home. How the hell can he cope with bullying at school on top of that? The way you empower victims of bullying is by taking the power away from the bullies. I mean, we should at least do that in schools, right? Right? I think I'm done. This really wasn't a very fun video to make. And Jaclyn, I really hope no hard feelings. This wasn't meant as an attack against you. You just happened to tackle two subjects that I feel really strongly about, and that's mental illness and bullying in the same video. And that's why I responded. Otherwise, I swear to God, I would not have made a video about ELLIOT RODGER. Fucking ELLIOT RODGER. Fuck! Thanks for watching, everyone. I know this wasn't a short video, so if you managed to sit through it, I really appreciate it. If you took anything useful at all, maybe consider thumbs up. If not, well, oh, thumbs up anyway, because it's my birthday. Yeah. What am I doing? I don't know. This feels so awkward. Oh my God.